Proportional Response. Book 1, Chapter 18, Part 4. Opening Moves 4. Fearadhach found that keeping his feet from drumming on the floor while facing a human fighter, even one who had saved him from a terrible threat and promised to vacate Growful space, required a lot of concentration. The human admiral seemed to sense his distress and gave him a tight-lipped smile for a moment, then, off-camera, spoke to the man. The sidebar didn't last long, and then the human turned back to face Fearadhach and spoke. "We will be sending you a data feed, if you want it, which will contain all of our telemetry readings. I know that this is your home system, and you have an outstanding sensor net, but I have several military-grade sensors trained specifically on the debris. We estimate that nothing coming out of that field is going to be a threat anytime soon to anything that can't get out of the way, but you are welcome to have your own computers crunch our data and double-check it. We do ask that you steer civilian traffic away from the operation until we have left the area. My pilots are doing a lot of hard maneuvers to try and get at all the escape pods, and a civilian ship is not a complication they need. If, however, any of your fuel or food suppliers is of a mind to sell us some provisions, we will pay full prices for them. Our expected pricing indexes will be in the data feed with the telemetry. Of course, those prices are based on last week's averages, so there is room for negotiation if your people need more, and we are willing to pay a premium for delivery." Fearadhach nodded to indicate his understanding, wishing that at least one other person had managed to keep themselves in the command center. He'd like to get those data feeds up as quickly as possible. 2 indicators flashed on his display, one notifying him that the humans had made a request to start sending them data, the other from the president. He hit her button first, and she surprised him by showing up on his screen rather than sending text messages. She said nothing, didn't even really give him any hints about what she thought, just sat there and stared at him. He turned back to the human admiral, who seemed to be waiting for a response. Fearadhach didn't even try to keep the tremble out of his voice. "We thank humanity and the Confederated military for their assistance in this matter, and will gratefully accept your data feeds as soon as we can set our computers up to receive them. I will forward your price list to our merchants, and any who are interested will be in contact with you." The human made a strange huff noise, but nodded in what seemed to be acceptance or approval. "Very good, Commander. Thank you for your time. We hope not to impose on your people, nor their hospitality, for long, and will be departing as close to the 14-hour mark as we are able." Fearadhach felt like his heart would burst, and it took all of his self-control, as his body strained against his chair's harness, to keep his hand away from the quick release on his chair and run towards the screen, towards the perceived safety of the human. He noticed movement from the president. Her eyes had grown larger than he thought possible, and her head shook back and forth spastically. Darkness began to encroach on his vision, and he forced himself to breathe, to relax, and slow his heartbeat. At least enough to speak. "Admiral, we Growful thank you for your assistance in protecting us from Zoltan predation. I do not think we would have been able to provide the Zoltan with everything they wanted, and hesitate to think about the damage they would have caused when we could not comply. That said, I beseech you, please do not leave. While we are not completely defenseless, we do not have the ability to fight the Zoltans, and fear that they may return to do even more damage in an attempt to punish us for the loss of their fleet than they would have in taking what they wanted. We will provide you with whatever we are able in terms of support, but please, do not leave." The human gave him a small, sad smile, and acknowledged the points with a slight nod. He then held up a hand in what seemed to be a placating gesture, and spoke. "I, the Confederated military, and humanity, thank you for the trust implicit in that request for protection. Sadly, I cannot keep this fleet here. Our fleets are spread terribly thin, and I have a large volume of space I have to protect. However, if you and your people wish to be counted among our allies, we will accept that and offer what protection we can." Fearadhach felt the blackness closing in on his vision, and could see that the president had already passed out. The human admiral leaned forward and clapped his hands loudly. Somehow, the sound caused Fearadhach to start, and he sat up straight in his seat again. The admiral continued to speak. "Understand, Commander, that the phrase I just used does not mean the same thing when it comes from us as it did when coming from the Zoltan. What I mean is that I, and my fleet, We'll do everything we are able to ensure the safety of you, your people, and this system. At the same time, yours is not the only system which my task force is charged with protecting, and we can't be everywhere at once. We will respond as quickly as we are able, which is to say that unless we are actively in combat, we will immediately set course and proceed here as fast as our ships can go if we find out something has happened here. There are two possible issues though. The first is how long it might take for me to find out that something has happened. The second is that I will have to be cautious in my approach if I don't know exactly what the tactical situation here is. So, I have a proposal for you. I have a kickbox, which will give you a high bandwidth connection to our high command, which will relay any and all information you provide directly to my task force. Now wait, Fifths. Don't look at me like that. I am not proposing that you turn over all your telemetry forever to the Confederated military. The box has standard interface connections for both data and power. Removing it from your systems will be easy, as will installation. All you should need to do is hook it up and provide it with. The Admiral stopped himself and sighed. Sorry, got carried away. Your techs should be able to put it in and take it out in minutes, as long as you have standard connections and protocols available. Keep it plugged in as long as you like. Put a switch on it to turn the data off. Don't plug it in unless there is a problem. I will humbly suggest to you that you should plug it in and feed us data until the Exaltants are defeated, just in case, but that is entirely up to you. Fifth F nodded and saw that someone had roused the President. Her head darted this way and that for a moment, but at last he saw resolution on her face. She nodded to him and waved a hand. He turned back to the screen with the human. We thank you for your generosity, Admiral. I know that an ETT like that is not a cheap piece of equipment. I will send someone to collect the KC from you, and will see to it that the ship which comes out to you has some of our best food supplies. We would not want anyone to think that the Orinto delegation is ungrateful. The Admiral nodded, waved, gave him another of those thin-lipped smiles, and signed off. Another human face appeared on the screen and began to talk about logistics. High Admiral Cassica, 5th tier, Master of Strategy, holder of the Wisak Province, Keeper of the Open Fist, Victor of Raikasis, 27th generation voter, sat in the fleet command chair of his flagship and allowed a smile to spread slowly across his face. It had taken hours and hours of political maneuvering, calling in favors, making threats, and ultimately just setting his fleet on course and daring anyone to deny him. But he'd won the right to be the Admiral sent to bring the Quilcotha to heel. He looked out over his command bridge, then glanced at the countdown timer displayed. He felt sure, on every ship in the Zoltan fleet, the one which signaled the end of the waiting period for the war. I can see the logic of waiting on these enforcement actions until that timer runs out. While I would prefer to simply bring all of the lesser races to heel against the humans before the shooting starts with them, waiting until the timer runs out has a certain brilliance. Intelligence says that the humans have started the war by concentrating most of their fleet in defensive positions around their worlds, and sending a few large fleets to hit major targets in our space. He felt his smile turn even more predatory as he eyed the weak system before him, ripe for the picking. I hate to agree with Jalat, but she is right. It is past time for the Zoltan to stop playing these silly games with the lesser races and simply bring them to heel. Of course, I think we should just conquer them all outright, rather than all of this making unreasonable demands and then knocking their little hills over. At the same time, it should be fun watching them scramble and squirm before attacking. I always have enjoyed kicking the Quilcotha around. It's too bad the humans decided to start by cowering in their systems, but it doesn't really matter. I am sure I'll get the chance to destroy a few of their ships soon enough. He looked at the timer again. Close enough. We won't be attacking until after the timer is down, and the trip from here to our attack point is plenty long enough for me to give orders. He spoke in a loud voice. Fleet comms. Signal all ships to spin up their singularity drives and prepare for FTL. I will begin issuing orders for our police action shortly. Kasika then took over the plot and brought up a holo of the Quilcotha home system. He set up the first few maneuvers. A few targets to be blasted out of the sky to make sure the Quilcotha understood he meant business. After a few moments, he realized that his bridge still sat quietly. He looked away from his plot to find that every eye had turned away from their duties to look at him instead of their jobs. He allowed a growl to form in the back of his throat. One of his ratings spoke up.
"Admiral, are you sure about those orders? You are looking at civilian depots, and we are not at war with..."
Fearseeker's growl got louder for a moment before he snapped a reply.
"You are relieved for questioning orders. Go to the brig. If you are lucky, I won't have you drummed out of the military for this."
He expected the idiot to stand and walk off his bridge while everyone else got back to work. None did. All of them, seemingly as one, looked up and behind him.
"What are you idiots doing? Do I have to..."
The voice of his first officer sounded behind him. He usually liked listening to that voice, particularly when she lay beside him in his bed, telling him how much she appreciated her position with him. But it held a hardness this time that he didn't like.
"Major Srasa Mendes sends his regards."
He then felt something press against the back of his head and heard the sound of a pulse pistol's trigger being pulled. Then he knew no more.